I want you to take your Bible and go to the book of Ecclesiastes this morning as we return to these books, book a week and the journey, and now the section of the wisdom literature, the wisdom books. Book of Ecclesiastes, and what I'm going to do is read the opening part of chapter 1, and then we'll bookend it and go to the end of the book, because that kind of will capture the theme of the book, where we're headed, and the antidote that is offered for the issue at hand in the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, beginning at verse 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. We think that's Solomon. Pretty much agreed. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Empty. What advantage does man have in all his work, which he does under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun sets, hastening to its place. It rises there again, blowing toward the south and turning toward the north. The wind continues swirling along, and on its circular courses the wind returns, and all the rivers flow into the sea. Yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are wearisome. Man isn't able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. That which has been said, that which will be, that which has been done, is that which will be done. Nothing new under the sun. Everything comes around. Nothing new. Think about it. That iPhone 6S, new today, by next week, out of date. Be something new in another month or so. Hey, nothing new under the sun. Just keeps on going. Is there anything of which one might say, see, this is new? Already it's existed for ages, which were before us. There's no remembrance of earlier things, and also of the later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later still. Chapter 12, the end of the book. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, when you'll say, I have no delight in them. Before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened, and clouds return after the rain. In the day that the watchmen of the house tremble and mighty men stoop, the grinding ones stand idle because they're few, and those who look through windows grow dim. And the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low, and one will arise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly. Furthermore, men are afraid of a high place and of terrors on the road. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags himself along, and the caper berry is ineffective. For man goes to his eternal home, while mourners go about in the street. Remember him before the silver cord is broken, and the golden bowl is crushed. The pitcher by the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. In addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered, searched out, and arranged many proverbs. We looked at Proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. The words of wise men are like goads, and masters of these collections are like well-driven nails, for they're given by one shepherd. Beyond this, my son, be warned. The writing of many books is endless. Excessive devotion to books is wearying to the body. My kids remind me of that all the time. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God. keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. Five years after Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, a Dominican priest named Savonarola had been given tremendous authority by the de Medicis. He had found favor with the de Medicis and with the Pope, and granted a place of great privilege and power in the city of Florence. He was greatly concerned about the lifestyle choices people were making, and so he developed a list of vanities. The list of vanities were things that he believed that the pursuit of them, the preoccupation with these, would lead to sin. And so they gathered up all the vanities. Now, the vanities consisted of things like mirrors, makeup, cosmetics, consisted of lyrics to songs. It consisted of paintings. Whatever was considered something that might push somebody or encourage somebody to pursue those things that promoted vanity or emptiness were gathered up, and on February 7th, 1497, they had a big bonfire. It's called the Bonfire of the Vanities. It wasn't long after that Savonarola himself fell out of favor with the de Medicis, fell out of favor with the Pope, and he was excommunicated and ultimately executed. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. The book of Ecclesiastes deals with vanities. If you allow it, it's kind of like Solomon's bonfire of the vanities, because he's going to go through and say, hey, this is vanity, this is vanity, this is vanity, empty, 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 empty. And he's going to torch them. But the vanities he's talking about are not mirrors, they're not cosmetics. He's going to give some specific things that impact people's lives, and I think beyond that are ideas. Ideas. Actions are rooted in ideas. The heart and the mind. What produces the pursuit of that which is vain is not the act itself, but the heart of the mind. If I were to summarize the book of Ecclesiastes in the words of Jesus, Jesus kind of took all of Ecclesiastes and summed it up in a very succinct statement with which I'm sure you're familiar. Matthew chapter 16. For what shall it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul? What will he give in exchange for his soul? That's really this message of the book of Ecclesiastes. What does it profit you to have a mindset that you think you'll gain the world and lose your soul? We live in a time and an age where a particular mindset seems to prevail. I don't think it's anything new. Although you can look back, and if you have a course in the history of philosophy, you'll come to this particular gentleman's name. His name is William James. And William James gave birth to a particular approach, worldview, life, philosophy called pragmatism. It's probably the first truly American philosophy. Now, pragmatism, we're all pragmatic to one degree or another, okay? I mean, pragmatic means what? We want it to be practical, to have it work, okay? Now, when I use the term pragmatism, I'm not talking about pragmatic in the sense of trying to have things and make things efficient. What we're talking about is a mindset that begins to say, listen, what really matters is what works in the present. The only thing that matters, the only thing that's real, the only thing that's true is what works. Its kissing cousin is utilitarianism, which says what's good for the majority, the most number of people. Whatever works for the good, for the majority. John Dewey embraced pragmatism and applied it to the educational system. And we see in much of life and expressed in life is pragmatism. You see it politically. You do it for what's expedient for the present, as opposed to what's the right for the good. You see it in life played out in people's lives day to day, making choices for what's going to benefit them and work for them in the present and in the short term. Let me help you out. You probably know the lyrics. And the tune will start running through your mind. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof, because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel life like happiness is the truth, because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you, because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Yeah, Pharrell Williams made a lot of money off of making people happy. Kind of the prophet of pragmatism. So I want you to listen again. Because sometimes when we're singing words in the tune and bebopping along, sometimes we don't really hear what we're saying. So let me help you out. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. That truth is determined as to whether you're happy or not. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. See, whatever makes you happy, that's truth. It doesn't have to be the same thing that it makes you happy. In fact, they could even be contradictory. But if it works for you and makes you happy, it's true. If it works for you and makes you happy, it's true. That's pragmatism. My guess is that's the world you live in day after day after day. You go to work. That's the controlling ethic of the day. You make choices based on whether it makes you happy, whether it works for you. And how do you know if it works? It makes you happy. That's the mindset. That's the idea. And I think that's the idea that's in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's the idea that I said, Solomon says, hey, there's nothing new under the sun. Pragmatism may have had its birth as a philosophy here in the United States in the beginning of the 20th century, but you know what? It's nothing new. It's been around for ages. It's just been expressed in different ways, in different forms, and it's there in the book of Ecclesiastes. Because that's what Solomon said he tried. Solomon tried to be happy through whatever circumstances and means that he could find that would give him, in that moment, in that present, at that time, a sense of satisfaction and meaning. And so when you work your way through the book of Ecclesiastes, that's what you encounter. He wanted to know what real wisdom was, and he wanted to know wisdom is, how do I navigate life? How do I navigate life? What are the choices? How do I make choices to navigate life? And so chapter 2, he said, look, come now, I'll test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. Pleasure. Happiness. Satisfied by any physical means you could ever aspire to do or to have. In fact, he says down in verse 10, all that my eyes desired, I didn't refuse them. I didn't withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor and this reward of all my labor. He said, look, I had all the things you could ever want, all the physical pleasures. I had the best wine cellar, the best of the wines. I set my heart to that. He said, I enjoyed it. He said, if I used to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely. He tried all kinds of things, substances, that would satisfy, give him pleasure. He tried throwing himself into gardens and buildings, and then he had slaves and servants, he had wives, he had whatever your heart could ever think could satisfy you, he had it. To be satisfied and experience pleasure and happiness in the moment. Whatever was working for him at that time is what he went after and pursued to provide that pleasure for him. Sometimes we think, well, maybe the legacy. Maybe my legacy will be what matters and give me meaning and happiness. Verse 15, chapter 2, I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool will also befall me. Why have I been so wise? This is vanity. There's no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten. Verse 21, when there's a man who's labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to the one who's not labored with him. This too is vanity and a great evil. You know what he says? Even my legacy. They're more inclined to remember the fool than they are to remember me. Isn't it amazing? The people, if you go out on the street and ask them who the people of notoriety, they think of the villain before they think of the hero. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about our legacy and thinking that if I can do all of these things and provide a legacy for the generations that follow, all Solomon's saying is, you know what, after you die, you're not in control anymore. So all those things you were thinking you were going to be passing on to that next generation, it's like the wind. If you think that the accumulation or whatever for a legacy is what's going to provide for you satisfaction and pleasure for the moment, you're mistaken. There he goes on. He continues on. Look, he talks about work. You know, chapter 3 has the lyrics to Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds, which that's another story. But work. Sometimes men in particular, your identity is shaped by your work. What you do, how much you do it. all of your labor, all of those things. He said, I tried that. It worked for me for a while. But as time passed on, it didn't work for me anymore. It grows weary and tired. Chapter 5 and verse 10, he said, he who loves money won't be satisfied with money. He loves abundance with all its income. This too is vanity. I don't know about you, but you ever heard this line? Parents. I want my kids to go to school, to go to college, so they can have a good job and earn a good income. You ever heard that line? You ever spoken that line? Thought that line? Hey, right here. You know what you're saying to them? What matters most is what works for you. That you find happiness in your job, find satisfaction in your money. That's what we're telling them. We're telling them exactly what Solomon said. He tried. Guess what? Didn't work. There's nothing wrong with having an education and having a job and making an income. There's nothing wrong with that. But Solomon says, when that's your motivation, when that's what's driving you and you think you're going to find a fulfilled life by that, you're mistaken. That's pragmatism at work. Chapter 8, he talks about power. He talks about power, and he says, look, power comes politically, but it's not always political power. It comes in a variety of forms. Power is intoxicating. And sometimes people aspire to power in order to have control and authority and exercise that authority over other people. And if I can have that control over people and exercise that authority and power, then I'll be satisfied. It'll provide for a moment. Well, obviously Savonarola found out that that's fleeting. And certainly in the times which we live and politically, we see that it's maintain power. You don't always do the right thing. You do the expedient thing in order to have power. See? It's called pragmatism. And if you think that power, ultimately, having the authority and the control, Solomon, I mean, he's the king. What more authority and power could you want? People came to him because he was wise, because of his wealth, because of all that he'd done. But they were all displays of a tremendous power that Solomon exercised. Chapter 9, I marked a verse that the last 2 weeks, last week in particular, meant a lot to me. Hey, husbands, you might want to highlight this one for you too. Ecclesiastes 9:9. Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which he's given to you under the sun. For this is your reward in life. Enjoy life with the woman that God has given you all the days of your fleeting life, because that's a reward that God has given you. Something here at Faith Bible Church we ought to be extremely mindful of after the events of the last 2 weeks. Because what the conclusion is through chapter 9, and you see it running throughout this book, is when you think about the present only and what satisfies you for the present, you know what you're denying? You're denying a reality. Here's the reality. Awfully depressing reality. Guess what? we're all going to die. Everybody dies. The rich man, the poor man, the man in power, the man who's oppressed, the man who has seemingly a large legacy, the man who has no, it doesn't matter. Death is not partial. Everybody dies. And so when you're focused on the moment and you're focused only on what provides satisfaction for the present and making all of your choices on that basis, he said you're denying the reality that you're going to experience. That is, you, just like dogs and cats and everything else, are going to die. We spend so much time preparing and making decisions about our life, we don't make any decisions to prepare for death. And that's the ultimate reality, experientially for us. I was listening this week went back and watched a podcast produced by Dallas Seminary. It was done the last couple of weeks. It was a 2-part interview with Darrell Bach and interviewing a gentleman who heads up a ministry at Ohio State. That's why it was of particular interest to me. He heads up an apologetic ministry up here in Columbus in Ohio State. And so the focus of the questions dealt with how do you deal with this at Ohio State University. Some of you have students who are there at Ohio State or are considering Ohio State. That's why it was of particular interest to me. And this man, as he started to unfold their ministry and the struggles, the challenges, it was not only regarding what's at Ohio State, but was expressing the times in which we live and expressing the mindset of millennials and college students. And he said, a lot of people, you think that they're antagonistic towards Christianity right off the bat. He said, that's not the case. He said, they're not antagonistic. They've never thought about it. He said, and so to stop somebody and say, have you ever thought about, and I'll use the term metaphysical questions, metaphysical as opposed to physical are the ideas. The ideas of ultimate reality, the ideas of the big questions of life. And what he finds is that the students today have never taken the time. Their lives are so filled, so busy, crammed with so much stuff all the time that they've never taken the time to stop for 10 minutes and think about those questions. It's not that they're antagonistic. It's just that they don't think about them anymore. Who am I? Where am I from? Where am I going? He said the greatest challenge is getting them to stop and to think, because all they think about is the present. All they think about is what it can provide some sense of relief, satisfaction to the now. The antidote to that is in chapter 12. In chapter 12, he begins with the statement, remember now the Creator in the days of your youth. And here's why I think he says that. Particularly for young people, and I think you'll understand this, no matter what age you're at. Young people, and I don't mean teenagers only, have a very difficult time thinking beyond their youth. When I turned 50, that wasn't that long ago, let's put it this way, not as long ago as some others. Okay. This conscious thought occurred to me. I remember when my dad turned 50. When my dad turned 50, I was at an age where I was just had a young family early on life. And I remember thinking, man, Dad's old. I could not envision myself at my father's age. I could only envision myself in all that I was dealing with at the age I was, late 20s. I couldn't envision that. When I turned 50 and realized, whoa, I'm that age. How much time had gone by. I thought I'd never get there. That's why Solomon says, remember now the Creator in the days of your youth, because the tendency of youth is to not think that they'll ever get there. And what he's saying to them is, don't wait. You need to start to think about these questions now. You need to think about the antidote. And the antidote is remember the Creator. And that's why you get to the end in conclusion. In conclusion, therefore, he says, do this. Fear God. That's significant because what he's saying is that the present, if I'll use this term, the imminent isn't all there is. The antidote is to recognize that there's a transcendent God. That there's a God who is outside of the present. That there's a God who doesn't change. There's a God who is eternal. There's a God who is self-existent. There's a God who is different than all that we have and see in our experience. What gives us stability to navigate life is that there's a God outside of our experience. It's what gives us an anchor. That's why he says, remember the Creator. Think about that which is transcendent, not only that which you're only immersed in all the time. You've got to be related, you've got to be tethered or tied to the transcendent. If you want to understand the meaning, significance of life, the purpose of life, they're not answered in the imminent, they're answered by your relationship to the transcendent. See, who am I? I'm created in the image of God. I have a relationship with a transcendent God who's loved me. By the way, the apologist up at Ohio State said, in talking to people today, you have to go back and introduce them to God. Because they've lost the sense of the transcendent. And so fear God. Understand that there's more than what you see, taste, feel, experience. Secondly, those choices you're making, the roots of ethics are not found in what's good for you or what works for you. He says, keep the law of God, obey God's commands. It's not just what we think of in terms of those commands in the Old Testament. What he's saying is that there's a God who's revealed himself and he's given us a moral fabric, a moral and ethical code by which we live. And coming from a transcendent God, that morality and that basis for ethical conduct is not rooted in political thought. It's rooted in a transcendent God. It transcends time and it transcends culture. Listen, the Pope didn't make up the rule, the golden rule. Okay? And no politician made up the golden rule. Gets quoted a lot, but why is the golden rule transcend all times and all cultures? To love your neighbor as yourself is because it comes from where? It comes from God. Not because it's a good idea. Obey the commandments. There's a God who has given us rules to conduct our lives by. And here's why that's important. Solomon says, because there's a day when you all die, but that's not the end. There's a day of judgment and accountability. You don't live your life without responsibility and accountability. There's a day coming when everyone will give an account to God, that transcendent one. And we're not going to be able to say, well, that didn't work for me. No. The bonfire of the vanities for Solomon is the idea that all there is the present. He says, no, there's something greater. I have a friend who passed away this past year. He was in his 90s. He was the model success story in many ways. Came from humble beginnings. His parents were immigrants, farm laborers. And he had brothers and sisters and large family. And they were all different. And he was kind of entrepreneurial, and he came up with an idea. He started a little grocery store. And when he started his little grocery store, the idea was this. You could, on your way into work in the morning, you drop off your list. And during the day, he would take and package up and put in bags all your groceries, so that on your way out of town, all you had to do was run in and pick up the bag and your groceries. Solomon's right. There's nothing new under the sun. We think online shopping, that's basically old-fashioned online shopping. Okay? It's what people are doing, making money out of today. He made money out of it. He was quite successful to the point that he had an empire, if you'll allow that, of grocery stores. It grew and grew and grew, and that empire then became expressed in real estate. He had large real estate holdings. Now, it doesn't sound like much when you're from Bermuda. It's not a lot of real estate. But it's because there's not a lot of real estate that real estate's worth a lot of money. He owned a third of the Hamilton, the capital. He owned properties all over the U.S. While he was acquiring all of that to himself, his son died of drug addiction. He lost his son. And then he lost his wife because of his unfaithfulness and adultery. Because of that, he lost his relationships in the church. He was a man who had tremendous power. He wasn't a politician, but he controlled. He was the head of the board for the hospital. He was the head of the board for the major television networks. He owned the majority of shares in the banks. He had all the places of position and authority and all the things behind the scenes. He had tremendous power. I had lunch with him about 25 years ago, and he told me that he had, in the pursuit of all, he had lost that which mattered most. By that point, he had remarried and had 3 children, and told me about what he'd learned through that, and that he'd missed out on what it meant to fear God, and what it meant to make choices based on what God had revealed to him. He died this past year. He had been restored in terms of his walk with Jesus. But the interesting thing, I had a conversation with somebody a couple of weeks ago. All the things that he had worked for and all the things he had tried to leave as a legacy, you know what? His children and the new board members have come in and changed everything. All that he thought he'd laid out is all lost. I said, wow. Fernance could have written the book of Ecclesiastes. I don't want you to write the book of Ecclesiastes like Solomon did. We don't need another book. Solomon told us that. We don't need to write another book. It's been written. And in conclusion, when all's said and done, you navigate life and you find fulfillment in life and satisfaction in life by fearing God, keeping His commandments, and knowing that accountability is coming. And I hope that's where you're walking. If you're looking to find it in other ways this morning, learn from a man who had it all. And he said, vanity of vanities. Take what you're pursuing and throw it on the bonfire and come back to Jesus. Come back to the cross. Come back to who He is, God in the flesh, and what He's accomplished for you, that you might know. You might know God. You might know Jesus Christ, and you might know real life through Him.